Get there. That's what the kids asked in the car. We were driving north from North Dakota, heading to the country to the north, Canada. When are we going to get there? That's the eternal refrain for every parent hears in the car. The place we were going was called the International Peace Garden. I don't think many of you have probably been there. It isn't that big, but it's in the middle of a Native American reservation. It's also the boundary between North Dakota and Manitoba. And in that part of the world, there is no difference except an arbitrary boundary, the 49th parallel, that divides Canada from the United States. It's completely arbitrary. And running east-west there is a road, and running parallel to that road are walkways, and running along those walkways are rose gardens. And I'm only an 8-year-old kid or something like that. I could care less. You know, I smell the roses, and I run around, and there are paths, and that's all pretty cool. And the significance of what that was didn't dawn on me, because my mom said, well, you can go over there, that's Canada, and we'd walk over there. And then you'd come over here, this is the United States, no big deal. And we'd scamper back and forth between the two. And in the middle of an international peace garden, no customs officials, no enforcement, no border security, no nothing, just a peaceful border and a garden to celebrate that. Whoa. That's my idea of a national boundary, where you can see it because it's marked and it's recognized, and we appreciate each other's territory and sovereign abilities. But yet we're free to come and go and mix and mingle as we like. And I think back on it now, 50 years later, 60 years later, not 70 years later. Thinking back on it, I realized, oh my God, here I am in Newport and it's raining and I'm about to get out of the car and I'm tuned to NPR, and guess what's on the radio? Border security, national security, national emergency, blah, blah, blah. I don't know about you, but I'm getting walled out. I can hardly take it anymore. I can't even drive to Channing without being told about the security issues we have. Now, I want to finish my story about the International Peace Garden because my grandparents were immigrants from Europe, where the wealth inequities and where the church and where the government sort of drove lots and lots of people out. Mine from Sweden and Norway, but it could be from Guatemala or Honduras. It could be from Vietnam, could be from Korea. It doesn't matter where it's from. The idea is that I'm leaving one place to find better opportunities in another, and the U.S. was welcoming to my relatives. And so we were sodbuster, homesteading, Scandinavian dirt farmers. Within 2 generations, we're able to drive up and celebrate our country's border, our country, the United States, because the old ways were largely not forgotten, but subdued beneath the sense of being a united American. So there you have it. Now, the title for my sermon, To Build or Not to Build, is a play on Shakespeare, of course. To build or not to build a wall, and that refers to the fault line in American politics at the U.S.-Mexico border. The idea is to erect an unassailable or impregnable barrier between neighboring nations that were once a unified, though unincorporated, Spanish-speaking nation called El Norte. It was one place. To fund building a wall, our presidents declared a national emergency, and Congress views this declaration as an excess of power, blah, blah, blah. The result is partisan blah, blah, blah being built about blah, blah, blah with funding blah, blah, blah ad nauseum until I'm just walled right out of the whole thing. I can hardly stand it anymore. Yet here I am talking about it. So, to put this in context, how about these quotes from my morning newspaper, which is the Boston Globe? Last month, February, 1 month, 76,000 migrants crossed the border without authorization. More than double the levels from the same period last year and approaching the largest numbers in any February in the last 12 years. And this is the result of political blah, 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 and executive blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, there's a humanitarian crisis. Every single one of those 76,000 souls, has a mother and a father, and a country and a hope and a dream and a desire, unlike the wall in Mary Oliver's poem that sits mute, watching. I'd like to think that wall has a sense of humor about what's actually happening, or perhaps it's a sense of sadness. Next quote, "The migrants are coming to seek refuge from brutal socioeconomic forces, notably severe poverty and food insecurity. If I was hungry enough, I'd migrate myself, as did my ancestors. The situation is not sustainable." Quote unquote. "The flow of individuals from Central America to the United States will continue to rise until there's a clear shift, not an ambiguous one, a clear shift in the American response to the crisis at the border." And then here's the quote I want to share most. Quote, "Walls don't dissuade people who are suffering through a humanitarian disaster." Unquote. And now my spoiler. I do want to build a wall at the border, but not the kind of wall the executive branch has in mind. You'll have to wait to the end of the sermon to find out what kind of wall I'm talking about. This might be a hint. It's a stone. I reached my conclusion by reading two poems that you heard of. One was by Mary Oliver. She's been on my mind lately because last December our local book group decided to read her poetry. It was actually my idea, and I don't know where it came from, that we read some of her nonfiction and poetry for a book group. And we did, and we had a good time. And then she died that month. It was kind of odd. But when she was alive, she was a Unitarian Universalist favorite, with 3 of her readings present in our hymnal, in the Blue Book: Wild Geese, Morning Poem, and something that's untitled. She's also by far and away the country's best-selling poet, winner of both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. And she just died earlier this year. And thinking about her sent me back to her bestseller and award-winning predecessor, Robert Frost, author of America's most famous poem about walls, Mending Wall, which I read for you earlier this morning. So in the next few minutes, I want to combine their thoughts, those of Mary Oliver and those of Robert Frost, and to reflect on those poems. And instead of doing finger quotes for the poems, we're going to have the female voice down there do the reading. Would you please come up to the microphone? Margaret is going to read them for us, and she will start.
Something there is that doesn't love a wall that wants it down. Is that where I begin?
Right. That wants it down. Well, that something is all of nature, the physical nature of the winter frost in New England soils here, and the human nature within Frost the poet. His desire to stay on good terms with his wary neighbor. Border control, he realized, was not synonymous with border wall. Ironically, the 19th century New England fieldstone walls that Frost wrote about have become unifying cultural icons for us in the 21st century. The walls have become an icon of togetherness. I'm loving it. Scattered across the region's formerly pastoral and now largely forested landscape, these abandoned walls are the binding threads in our regional landscape fabric. The opposite is true for the border wall with Mexico that's proposed, a 30-foot tall, 6-foot deep, hardened steel, multi-billion-dollar barrier that will bisect an otherwise unified landscape of dusty semi-desert and soft rock ridges. That was one place before the Mexican-American War. The proposed wall won't be a binding thread, but a steel scissors, cutting us away from our neighbor to the south. How unlike the International Peace Garden.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Do they really? There's no easy answer because we are territorial. I like my place. But we are as territorial as we are social. Nevertheless, each spring, Frost's poet narrator invites his neighbor to walk the line between them using this ritual encounter to remind his neighbor that the old wall is no longer needed. His neighbor disagrees, invoking the adage, good fences make good neighbors. Frost's rejoinder is to attribute his neighbor's territorialism to primitive instinct.
Like an old stone savage armed, he moves in darkness, as it seems to me.
Alas, history and archaeology prove that the builders of walls as fences did move in darkness. Seemingly impregnable barriers are always temporary unless maintained continuously at high cost. Consider the Great Wall of China, Hadrian's Wall in Britain, the Great Wall of Incan Peru. Like the abandoned stone walls of New England, they're tourist attractions because such ruins reveal to us the folly of short-term solutions. In my own lifetime, I've watched the Berlin Wall be debated, erected, defended, demolished, and now largely forgotten. The fundamental problem with all walls in every age is geometric. Being lines in map view, they consist of an infinite number of points, any one of which can break the whole.
Before I built a wall, I'd like to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense.
The poet's question from 1914 are the same ones we're debating in 2019. I'd like to know who we're walling in and walling out. My answer is that a heavily fortified 1,954-mile-long barrier will send a message to the globalizing world that we are walling ourselves in. Diplomatically, it's called isolationism. And to whom will we give offense? Well, Lady Liberty, for one, and every past or future immigrant arriving by land, sea, and air from every other point of the compass by any other means. In New England, the slow multi-generation process of building walls was always more about enhancing the inside of farm properties than creating barriers between adjacent others.
Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down.
I'm that something with respect to the proposed southern wall, and ditto for the partisan political wall that's shutting our country down. And now I move on to Mary Oliver's poem, Knife. Note that her poem also begins with the word something.
Something just now moved through my heart.
So I ask, what is it that moves through your heart just now?
As that red-tailed hawk flew above the gray, cracked rock wall.
This wall, this stone wall built up from the earth, is no barrier but a marker in space that doesn't move.
It wasn't about the bird. It was about something, about the way stone stays mute and put, whatever goes flashing by.
The wall, built up from the earth, is no barrier but a marker in time that doesn't move.
Sometimes when I sit like this, quiet, all of the outrageous divisions of time seem ready to leave, to slide out of me.
The wall built up from the earth is no barrier but a calendar clock with no division into seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, years, decades, centuries, millennia, epochs, eras, and eons.
Then I imagine I would never move.
Can you do this now? Can you be still, not only in space, but also in time? Like the wall in Mary Oliver's poem. Can you freeze frame your thoughts when looking at this stone? Or better yet, have no thoughts at all? Please do so until I tell you to return. Ready, set, freeze. Okay. Now you can come slowly back to the present moment.
I was dazzled by the sheer, dense wall of blind stone without a pinch of hope or a single unfilled desire.
The wall built up from the earth is no barrier, but a symbol of stability and rest. Unlike the wall, we can see for better or worse. We can move from place to place. We can have hopes, whether met or dashed. We can have desires, whether filled or unfulfilled.
The wall, sponging up and reflecting so brilliantly as it has for centuries, the sun's fire.
Her wall, raised from the earth, is no barrier, but a reminder of the depth of time, the durability of stone, and the peacefulness of stability. In this church, people come and go, but the stone of the walls of our building remain, its crystals reflecting brilliantly the fiery fusion of the sun. To build or not to build, that is the question, as Shakespeare would have asked it. And now my answer. Yes. Let's build a wall that reminds neighbors of their respected places. But let's make sure we build it low enough so it can be easily stepped over, so that neighboring nations can appreciate each other from their respective sides. A symbolic wall whose solidity puts our hopes and desires into perspective and may help anchor them and remind us how fleeting and ephemeral we are in the grand scheme of things. Thank you, Margaret, for your voice. Thank you, Mary Oliver, for your poem. Thank you, Robert Frost, for your poem. And thank you all for being here today. Amen.